The land was a hard sheet of baked red clay, cracked by a sun that held no mercy. This was the Arizona Territory, or maybe New Mexico, in the late 1880s. The maps kept changing, drawn by men in faraway cities who had never felt the grit of this place between their teeth. The high mesas burned like rust-colored altars against a sky so blue it hurt to look at. By day, the dust was a living thing, a hot breath that coated every surface. By night, the cold was a blade, sharp and dry, settling into the canyons under a spill of stars that seemed too close, too bright. This was a land of waiting, waiting for rain, waiting for news, and now, waiting for the railroad. The Blackwood and Sons Company was pushing steel west, promising prosperity, promising to tame the wilderness. But the surveyors' flags were cutting deep into the heart of Dine Land, and the whispers in the saloons were not just of progress, but of water rights, of forced sales, and of an Indian agent who was growing fat on commissions. Into this furnace stepped Clara Walsh. She was 28 years old, and she carried the weight of her profession in a heavy wooden box. She was a photographer, a field reporter for an Eastern paper, a woman of Irish-American stock with eyes that had seen too much compromise and a jaw set with a resolve that men mistook for bitterness. She descended from the stagecoach in Stone Mesa, her long skirt already filmed with the fine red powder that was the town's lifeblood and its curse. The town itself was one street, a line of false-fronted buildings huddled against the vast emptiness. The saloon, the general store, the sheriff's office, and the new, gleaming sign of the Blackwood and Sons Land Office. As Clara directed the handling of her precious cargo, the camera, the heavy tripod, the sealed crates of wet glass plates and dangerous chemicals the town watched, men leaning against the livery stable stopped whittling. Their eyes lingered, taking in the unfashionable, practical cut of her traveling suit, the absence of a husband, the sheer audacity of her equipment. A woman, alone, doing a man's work. She felt their stares, a mix of grudging respect for the press credentials she carried and a thick, palpable scorn. In Stone Mesa, a woman's place was defined, and it was not behind a three-legged box of polished wood and brass. "Ma'am," the hotel proprietor said, his apron stained with the yesterday's gravy. He avoided her eyes as he took her coin. "Room is at the top of the stairs. Last one, quiet." Quiet was all she wanted. Her room was small, smelling of lye soap and the persistent dust that seeped through the windowsills. She locked the door, a flimsy latch, and began her ritual. She checked the seals on her chemical bottles. She wiped down the mahogany body of her camera, and then, from the false bottom of her sturdiest trunk, she retrieved a packet wrapped in oilskin. Inside was a map. It was not a government survey. It was a water map, drawn in the precise, elegant hand of her late father, an engineer who had once dreamed of bringing water to arid lands. But his dream, she suspected, had been corrupted. The lines on this map, lines he had drawn almost 15 years ago, did not follow the logical, graded path of the proposed railroad. They followed a hidden chain of springs, seeps, and underground aquifers, the secret water of the Dine, the water that Blackwood and Sons would need to run their steam engines, the water they were already claiming to discover through their own surveys. This map was her secret, her inheritance, and her burden. Her father's name was clean, but she feared he had been a tool, his work a blueprint for theft. She was here not just to document the truth of the frontier for her paper, but to find the truth of her own blood. This secret made her hands tremble. It also made her a target, though she did not yet know how deep the treachery ran. He had watched her arrive. Ashki Yazi did not watch from the town's single street. He watched from the ridge, a place of shadow and juniper, where the wind carried the scent of dust and greed. He was 32 years old, a man built of the land itself, all lean muscle and patient strength. His eyes, dark and assessing, missed nothing. He had seen the stagecoach, the woman, and the strange boxes. He had once been a guide for the United States Cavalry. He had worn their blue coat, eaten their hardtack, and learned their language, all in the mistaken belief that understanding them would help protect his people. He had left them 6 years prior, the day he led a patrol to a troubled area and found a peaceful camp scattered by bullets, their sacred spring fouled by dead horses. The disagreement had been moral and final. Now, his only goal was the protection of his family, his clan, and the Hozo, the harmony, the balance, the beautiful and proper way of living that was being threatened by the iron snake of the railroad. He watched this new woman, another white face, another potential paper assassin come to capture their images, their land, their souls, and sell them for Eastern coin. He felt the old, familiar tension knot in his shoulders. For 2 days, Clara worked. She photographed the main street. She photographed the worried face of a shopkeeper, the arrogant posture of a railroad surveyor. She listened. The town was buzzing. Blackwood and Sons were offering top dollar for any land with potential water. The Indian agent, a man named Pike, was facilitating the deals, assuring everyone that the dying were being fairly compensated and moved to better lands. It was a song Clara had heard before. It always ended in a dirge. On the 3rd day, she wanted the landscape. The before. She hired a mule and rode out toward the mesas, against the advice of the liveryman. Storms brewin'. Ma'am, not rain, wind. She had ignored him. The air was still, heavy, and a strange yellow light filtered over the world. She set up her camera, focusing on a magnificent sweep of red rock. The silence was absolute. And then it was broken. A sound began, a low rumble from the southwest. It was not thunder. The yellow sky turned a sickly brown. She looked, and her heart stopped. A wall. A solid wall of dust and debris stretching thousands of feet into the air, was racing toward her. A haboob. She had read about them, but the reality was a nightmare. Before she could even unmount her camera, the wind hit. It was not a gust. It was a physical blow. A solid mass of sand and fury that screamed in her ears and stole the breath from her lungs. The mule, eyes wide with terror, broke its tether and bolted, disappearing into the churning brown maelstrom. Clara clutched her tripod, a useless anchor. The world vanished. There was no up, no down, only the roar of the wind and the sting of sand that felt like needles. She was blinded, choking. She wrapped her shawl around her face, tasting wool and panic. She fumbled for her heavy camera case, her lifeline, and began to stumble, hoping to find the lee of a rock. She misjudged the edge of the wash. Her foot found only air. She cried out, a sound stolen by the wind, as she slid down a loose scree slope, her heavy skirts tangling, her hands clawing at the gravel. She was sliding toward a deep, shadowy crevice, a fissure in the rock. A hand seized her arm. It was not a gentle rescue. It was a vice, a hard, unyielding grip that arrested her slide with a jolt that nearly dislocated her shoulder. She was hauled, unceremoniously, up and back, dragged against a wall of rock as the world raged around her. She was pressed into a shallow overhang, barely a cave. Sheltered from the worst of the wind but not the deafening sound, she lay gasping, her lungs burning, her eyes sealed shut with mud. When she finally managed to wipe them clear, she saw him. He was the man from the ridge, Ashki Yazi. He was standing, not sitting, at the mouth of the alcove, his body a still silhouette against the roaring brown chaos. He had saved her. He was watching her. "You are careless," he said. His voice was deep, not loud, but it cut through the wind's howl. It vibrated with the stones around them. Clara pushed herself up, her body bruised and trembling. Her first instinct was not gratitude, but defense. Her camera case. Where was it? She saw it, a few feet away, where he had thrown it. It was caked in dust. "I am Clara Walsh," she managed, her voice a dry rasp. A reporter for the— A paper assassin, he interrupted, his gaze fixed on the box. You come to take— You hunt for pieces of us to put in your paper boxes. Anger, sharp and vital, cut through her shock. I am here to find the truth, she retorted, pulling her shawl tighter. Which is more than I can say for some. You are one of them. Are not you a scout for the cavalry, leading them to the water, showing them the hidden places? His eyes went flat. It was the only sign of the nerve she had struck. He took a step toward her, and she flinched, pressing back against the rock. I was, he said, the words precise, heavy. I wore their blue. I learned their words. I learned their lies. I left them when I saw what their truth was. Now, I protect my home, my hose-ho. She did not know the word, but the way he said it like a prayer, like a weapon, silenced her. The gap between them was more than the few feet of dusty air. It was a canyon of worlds, of histories, of pain. The storm raged for what felt like a Gethsemane. The air in the alcove was thick with their shared breath and the smell of ozone and dry earth. Clara's throat was raw, a fire demanding water. Her own canteen, she realized, was gone, lost with the mule. He watched her, this man of the rock. He saw her swallow, saw the pain in her throat. His expression was unreadable, carved from the same hard patience as the land itself. After a long silence, he unhooked a canteen from his belt. It was not a metal army issue. It was pottery, a deep ochre, painted with black lines that spoke of rain and corn. He did not hold it out to her. He set it on the ground, halfway between them, a test, a statement. She looked at the canteen, then at him. He had saved her life, and in the next breath, accused her of being a soul thief. He was a puzzle she could not solve, a man who moved with a purpose she could not grasp. Slowly, her hands aching, she reached for the flask. The clay was cool, smooth. She drank. The water was a shock. It was cold, clean, and tasted of the earth, of clay, of life itself. It was the best water she had ever tasted. She drank deeply, and when she was finished, she placed the canteen back on the ground, her movements careful, deliberate. Thank you, she said. He only inclined his head, a bare acknowledgement. As the wind began to die, the roar fading to a whine, the brown light outside shifted, brightening. The sun was finding a way through. A single hawk, its feathers ruffled, cut a sharp line across the clearing sky, its cry a thin, sharp note of freedom. Ashki Yazi turned to the opening. The storm is finished. Clara gathered her camera case. It was heavy. The wet plates inside probably ruined. The price of truth. I have to get back to Stone Mesa. He looked at her, his gaze sweeping over her. A woman alone, her face streaked with mud, her fine Eastern clothes torn, her sense of direction utterly gone. Your town is that way. He pointed. She looked. She saw only a world scoured clean, a landscape of raw rock and new dunes of sand, utterly alien. I do not know the way. He held her gaze for a long moment. I know. You will pay a price for the truth you seek. Clara Walsh. And I, he said, looking at her camera, will pay a price for guiding you back. Ashki Yazi had left her at the edge of the scoured wash, just within sight of the dusty rooftops of Stone Mesa. He had pointed, given her the line, and then melted back into the juniper and rock, leaving her with the taste of clean water and the heavy burden of her own survival. It took her 2 days to clean the grit from her equipment. The haboob had been merciless. 3 of her precious glass plates were shattered, and the 2 she salvaged were scarred by the sand. The images blurred into ghosts. The truth, she thought bitterly, was cracked. She was developing one of the blurred plates in the cramped, lye-scented confines of her hotel room, the red lantern casting a hellish glow, when the smell of smoke reached her. It was not the familiar scent of pinon pine from the town's chimneys. This was sharper, acrid, with a greasy undertone of kerosene. Her journalistic instincts, sharper than her fear, took over. She packed a new mule, a grudging purchase from the livery, and rode south, following the dark column that stained the sunset. She found it 3 miles out, a small, independent cattle operation, a line cabin and a series of corrals, was engulfed in flames. This was not an accident. The fire was too uniform, too fast. She could smell the accelerant over the sickening odor of burning hair and hide. As she approached, keeping to the low ground, she saw them 3 riders, their faces obscured by kerchiefs, driving the remaining cattle off into the darkness. Dine raiders, the town would say. Clara dismounted, dragging her heavy tripod and camera box behind a swell of sandstone. She worked with frantic, practiced hands, her heart a cold drum against her ribs. She needed light, but the dusk was failing, and the fire itself was too bright. A chaotic subject. The men were already gone. But then she saw him, a 4th man, sitting dead still on a fine horse on the opposite ridge, watching the destruction. He was not one of the kerchief-clad riders. He was dressed in a dark duster, his hat pulled low, but the set of his shoulders was confident, managerial. He was supervising. Clara adjusted her lens, her fingers stiff. She was too far for a clear portrait, but the light from the collapsing barn roof suddenly roared, illuminating him in silhouette. He turned his head, looking back toward the flames, giving her his full back. He was a white man. She did not hesitate. She uncapped the lens and triggered the magnesium flash powder. A violent, brilliant white whoosh lit the canyon, freezing the scene, followed by a puff of gray smoke. The man on the ridge spun his horse, his head snapping toward her. He saw her, a dark shape against the rocks. For a moment, they were fixed, the observer and the observed. Then he spurred his horse, not toward her, but away, disappearing over the ridge at a hard gallop. She had the plate. She packed her gear, her hands shaking so badly she almost dropped the precious, exposed glass. She did not know his name, but she knew his shape. She developed the plate in the early hours before dawn, her door barred, her ears tuned to every creak in the hotel. The image slowly resolved in the chemical bath. It was him, the back of a man, the specific cut of his dandy coat, the way he sat his horse. She had seen him in the hotel saloon, surrounded by railroad men. His name was Cole Mercer. The town was a hornet's nest by breakfast. The story was already written in the saloon, and the general store dine savages, emboldened, had attacked the Scully homestead, burned him out, stolen his stock. The railroad, the townspeople said, was right. They needed protection. They needed to clear the land. That evening, Clara forced herself to go to the saloon. The air was thick with smoke, whiskey, and manufactured outrage. At a central table sat Cole Mercer, clean-shaven, his boots polished, smelling faintly of bay rum, not smoke. He was accepting condolences on behalf of the territory's progress. And then he saw her, his eyes, the color of a winter sky, locked onto hers. He smiled, a slow, appreciative gesture, and rose, walking toward her table. "Miss Walsh," he said, his voice a smooth baritone that cut through the saloon's noise. He tipped his hat. "Cole Mercer, it is a distinct pleasure. We hear so little civilized news in this part of the world." "I am not here for civilized news. Mr. Mercer, I am here for the truth," Clara said, her hand cold around her small glass of water. "Ah, the truth." He pulled up a chair without asking, leaning in conspiratorially. "A noble pursuit. Did you hear about the fire at the Scully place? Terrible, simply terrible. It demonstrates the challenges Blackwood and Sons faces in trying to bring order to this land." "It does," Clara agreed, meeting his gaze. He smiled again, but it did not reach his eyes. "I understand you are a photographer. A dangerous occupation for a lady. Out here, you ride out alone. You might see things you do not understand." or things I understand all too well. His gaze sharpened. Just for an instant. Blackwood and Sons believes in a free press. Miss Walsh, we would be more than happy to offer you our cooperation, provide you with access. We want our story told correctly, to show the world the prosperity we are bringing. It was a threat, wrapped in silk. He was offering to buy her narrative. I will keep that in mind, she said, rising. Thank you for the drink you did not buy me. She left him there, the smile frozen on his face. She felt a chill that had nothing to do with the desert night. He knew she had been there, or he suspected. She returned to her room. The flimsy lock was broken, the wood splintered. She pushed the door open, her heart stopping. The room had been searched, but not by a brute. It was a precise, targeted violation. Her clothes were neatly folded on the bed. Her trunks were open. The floor of her makeshift darkroom was a glittering, sticky sea. Her chemical bottles, the collodion, the silver nitrate, the developer were smashed, their contents pooled and ruined. Her supply of clean glass plates was shattered, ground into the floorboards with a boot heel. She rushed to the hidden box where she kept her exposed plates. They were gone, all of them. The blurred ones from the haboob, the street scenes, and the one from last night, the plate of Cole Mercer's back. She sank to her knees, the sharp smell of the chemicals stinging her eyes. Or perhaps it was tears. She was blind. She was silenced. Then the true panic hit. She scrambled to her largest trunk, the one with the false bottom. She clawed at the lining. It was already pried open. The wood splintered. The oilskin packet. Her father's map. It was gone. They had taken everything, her work, her chemicals, her proof, and her secret, her father's legacy. The map that was her only leverage, her only deep, personal reason for being here. She was alone, disarmed, and utterly exposed. Her idealism felt like a child's fantasy. This was survival, and she was failing. A soft scrape, not from the door, from the window. Clara surged to her feet, grabbing the only weapon she had, the heavy iron leg of her broken tripod. Who is there? The window sash slid up, silent as an owl's flight. A shadow detached itself from the alley's darkness and stepped into her ruined room. Ashki Yazzie. He stood for a full second, his dark eyes sweeping the room, taking in the broken glass, the chemical stench, the open trunk. His face remained impassive, but his presence was a solid wall of quiet intensity. They hunt you, he said. It was not a question. The paper assassin is now the prey. Get out, she whispered, her voice shaking, the tripod leg heavy in her hand. He ignored her, his gaze landing on the smashed bottles. They fear your glass eye. They fear the shadows you capture. He looked at her, at the tripod leg she held like a club. He made no move toward her. Instead, he reached into the folds of his linen shirt. He pulled out two objects. The first was the pottery canteen, the beautiful, ochre-colored flask he had given her to drink from in the storm. She had left it in the crevice, too panicked and disoriented to remember it. He placed it gently on her nightstand, a solid, earthy presence in the midst of her manufactured ruin. You are careless, he said. You forget what gives life. The second object made her stop breathing. It was a piece of oilskin, torn, stiff with dried red mud. The wind in the great storm was a thief, he said, holding it out. It tore this from your mule's pack just before the animal bolted. Her hand trembled as she took it. It was half of her father's map. She rushed back to the trunk, to the empty false bottom. They took the rest, she said, the words choking her. Tonight, they were here. They took the other half. Ashki's face, which had been still, now hardened. A dark, dangerous light entered his eyes. Then they have the map from the railroad line to the edge of the stone mesa, a map of the dry lands. He pointed to the piece she held in her hand. And you, Clara Walsh, hold the map to Be Odd, the valley of my grandmothers, the sacred water. The world shifted. Mercer did not have the full map. He had a piece, but she had the heart. "They will kill me for it," she whispered, the reality closing in. "They will kill us for it," he corrected. A new noise from the street. Shouting. The clang of the saloon piano stopped. A man, loud and drunk, yelled, "We need security. The railroad needs security. Time to hunt some raiders." Ashki moved to the window, peering through the gap in the curtains. "The town," he said with contempt, "is forming a posse to protect the railroad. They are looking for my people, or they are looking for you." This was it. The line was drawn. Clara looked at the ruins of her life, the broken plate of Mercer. The one thing she had of the fire was gone. Her chemicals were gone. Her map was torn. But she was not beaten. "They will not stop with the fire," she said, her voice finding a new strength. "Mercer, he will go to the trading post next, to meet with the agent, Pike, to force the last of the sales." "I know," Ashki said. "I have to follow him. I have to get a message out. I need to get to a town with a telegraph. I need new chemicals. You need to live," he finished. "The main roads will be watched. This posse will be his eyes." She met his gaze, the chasm between their worlds suddenly bridged by a common enemy. "You know the high trails, the hidden ways. You guided the cavalry." The mention of the cavalry stung him. She saw it in the tightening of his jaw, the old wound, the shame he carried. "Why should I guide you?" he asked, his voice low. "You are still a white woman. You still carry a box that steals." "Because I am not one of them," she snapped, the fire returning. "Because I have this." She held up the torn map. "And they want it, because I will not let them win. Guide me. Ashki Yazi. Get me to Cedar Bluff. In return, I will give you my word. I will write the truth. Not just about Mercer, but about you, about your people, about the water, about what they are truly stealing." It was a contract, sealed in the air of a ruined room. His internal battle was plain on his face, the scout's past warring with the protector's future. He looked at the broken glass on the floor. The truth, cracked but not destroyed. "Gather what you can carry," he commanded. "The decision made. Only what fits on your back. Forget the heavy box." "I cannot," she said, already moving, wrapping the last of her lenses and her smaller notebook in her shawl. "My camera is the truth." He almost smiled. It was a grim, fleeting expression. "Then you will be slow. Meet me at the base of the Hawk's Needle. 1 hour after the moon rises, do not be seen. If you are seen, I will not be there." He was gone, slipping back out the window as silently as he had arrived, leaving her with half a map, a pottery canteen, and the terrifying, electric weight of her choice. Slipping from the hotel was like escaping a tomb. Clara Walsh moved through the alleyways of Stone Mesa, a ghost in her own life. The town was alive with a fever. Men, fueled by free whiskey from the Blackwood Saloon and the righteous anger of the dispossessed, were forming the Railroad Security Militia. She could hear them, their voices loud and full of a terrible purpose, calling for the blood of the raiders, calling for the capture of the dying arsonist. She carried her small wooden camera, a few lenses, her notebook, and the precious, torn half of her father's map, all wrapped in her heaviest shawl. The weight was awkward, unbalanced. She felt naked without the rest of her equipment, without the authority of her profession. Hawk's Needle was a tall spire of rock that pierced the sky north of the town. She reached it, her lungs burning, just as the moon, a sliver of bone, began its ascent. He was not there. She waited, her heart a cold stone in her chest. Had he abandoned her? Was this a trick, a test she had already failed? The shouting from the town grew louder, punctuated by a single gunshot, followed by whoops of excitement. They were riding out. Then, he was there, not from the trail, but from the rock itself. Ashki Yazi stepped from a shadow so deep she had not even registered it as a hiding place. He said nothing. He simply took the heavy bundle from her arms. He looked at the camera box, then at her. His expression a mixture of profound irritation and something else she could not name. "You are heavy," he said. He secured the bundle to his own back with practiced, efficient knots. "This box will slow us. We must move. The posse will ride the main trails, hunting for smoke. We will not." He set a pace that was agonizing. It was not a run, but a relentless, ground-eating walk that forced her to climb, to slide, to use muscles she did not know she possessed. He did not take the trails. He took the high ridges, the goat paths, the spaces between the rocks, moving through the landscape like water finding its own level. He never looked back to see if she was following. He assumed she would. Her pride, raw and aching, forced her to keep up. They walked for 2, perhaps 3 hours, the moon climbing with them, casting the world in a stark relief of silver light and black shadow. The air grew cold, the sharp, biting cold of the high desert. He stopped. So suddenly she almost collided with his back. They were on a ridge overlooking a dark, smoking scar on the land, the Scully homestead. "We must keep moving," she panted, her voice a raw whisper. "They will be here." "They have already been here," Ashki said. He was not looking at the smoking ruins. He was looking at the ground, his eyes scanning the earth with an intensity that made him seem part of the rock. He dismounted, a fluid motion, and walked to a flat slab of sandstone near the destroyed corral. He knelt. "What is it?" Clara came up beside him, her exhaustion momentarily forgotten. He pointed. On the rock, preserved by the dry air, was a handprint. It was not just charcoal. It was thick, black, greasy. A print left by a man who had braced himself on the stone. Clara moved closer. She touched the edge of the print. It was oil. Thick, industrial-grade oil. She had seen it, smelled it, on the axles of the freight wagons bringing supplies for the railroad. She scraped a small amount into a vial she kept for her chemicals, her journalistic instincts overriding her fear. She folded a piece of paper and took a rubbing of the print's shape. "A worker," she said. "A man who left his mark," Ashki said, his voice flat. He had moved on, to the tracks leading away from the fire. "They rode 3 horses, shod, but a 4th was here, this one." He pointed to tracks that were deeper, cleaner, a fine horse, a Tennessee walker, the kind of horse a man like Mercer would ride. He watched, and then he rode south. South. To the neutral lands, to Mays. Murphy's trading post was not a town. It was a fortress, built of adobe and local stone, nestled in the deep embrace of a box canyon. May Murphy was a woman who had outlived 3 husbands and a dozen Indian agents. She was a law unto herself, a neutral zone. She traded fairly with the dine, with the prospectors, with the settlers, and, if the rumors were true, with the ghosts of the canyon. They arrived near dawn, 2 more shadows detaching themselves from the night. Ashki hooted, the call of a screech owl, low and questioning. A lantern appeared in an upper window. May Murphy opened the heavy door herself. She was a large woman, her hair the color of iron filings, her face a map of the land she inhabited. She held a shotgun cradled in her arm as if it were a child. She looked at Ashki, and her expression softened. "Just a fraction." "My son," she said, her voice like gravel. Then she looked at Clara, and his shadow. "You are the one causing all the trouble. Get in, the coffee is hot, and the news is bad." Inside, the post was a cavern of wonders. Blankets, pelts, sacks of flour, coffee, beans, tools, and silver jewelry. It smelled of coffee, dust, and horses. Ashki spoke to May in the flowing, guttural tones of the Dine language. Clara stood by the door, feeling her exhaustion, her irrelevance. She was a trespasser in a conversation that was not meant for her. May finally turned, pouring 3 cups of thick, Black coffee. He was here, May said, switching to English. Mercer, and that Snake Pike, the Indian agent. They are not just buying land. Girl, they are stealing it. May explained. Mercer and Pike were using the town's new fear as a lever. They were visiting the outlying homesteads, the ones run by widows or old men. They were pushing paper. They are collecting water deeds, May said, her voice laced with contempt. They got old Mrs. Hennessy, her husband not even 2 months in the ground, to sign away her spring rights for $50. She cannot read a word of English. They told her it was a loyalty pledge for the railroad. May looked at Ashki, and they were pressing the elders, offering them flour and beans for a thumbprint on a paper that gives Blackwood rights to everything. Can you testify? Clara asked, her notebook in her hand before she even realized it. May laughed, a harsh, barking sound. Testify to who, Sheriff Hale? He is a good man, but he is one man, and he is caught between the law and the money. Mercer has the money, and the guns. May reached under the counter. She pulled out a piece of paper, a freight invoice, crumpled and stained with what looked like molasses. I found this after they left, dropped by the agent. Clara smoothed it out. It was a bill of lading from the Santa Fe railhead, a special freight car, due to arrive at the new Dry Gulch depot in 2 weeks. 400 pounds of seed rice, Clara read. A little late for planting, May said dryly, and a little heavy. Surveying equipment, Clara whispered, her blood running cold. Or worse. The date, Ashki said, his voice quiet, dangerous. He pointed to the date on the invoice. It is the day of the blessing, the day we sing for the rain. It was a provocation, a deliberate, calculated move to desecrate their ceremony, to show them who now owned the land, the water, and the very sky. The sound of horses, a lot of them, interrupted the silence. They were coming fast, not with the care of travelers, but with the reckless speed of a mob. The militia, May said, her hand going to the shotgun. They have been drinking. A man shouted from outside. May, we know she is in there. Send out the spy and her dine lover. Clara recoiled, the word lover striking her like a slap. Mercer's poison was spreading fast. They want a bounty, Ashki said to Clara, his face unreadable. Mercer has put a price on us. May Murphy walked to the heavy door. You boys are drunk, she yelled. And you are on neutral ground, Get. A bullet splintered the door jamb. That is Blackwood property you are harboring, a man yelled back. Send them out, or we burn you out. They will do it, May said, her face grim. Go, the root cellar. It is your only chance. Clara scrambled for the trap door, but Ashki grabbed her arm. No, a trap! A box with no way out! He was looking at the back wall, at the fireplace. May, he said, his voice urgent. May understood. She moved, not to the cellar, but to the wall of blankets, pulling them down. Behind them was a crack in the canyon wall, a fissure so narrow it looked like a shadow. It leads up to the ridge, May said. My grandfather used it. Go, walk in the shadows. Ashki. The men outside were using a log as a battering ram. The door groaned. Ashki shoved Clara toward the fissure. Go, do not look back. Clara squeezed into the narrow space, the rock cold and close, scraping her skin. She could hear the splintering of the door, the triumphant yells of the posse as they flooded the trading post. Ashki was right behind her. He was not panicked. He was breathing the shadows, his movements fluid, silent. He guided her, his hand on her back, not pushing, but steering her through the absolute darkness. Here, step up. Here, turn. He knew the stone. He was made of it. They emerged, breathless, into the cold moonlight. 100 feet above the trading post. Below, they could see the posse, like angry ants, overturning tables, their lanterns casting wild, monstrous shadows. They were safe, for the moment. Clara sagged against the rock, her body shaking. Not just from the cold. Ashki stood, a sentinel, watching the desecration of May's post. His face was granite, a mask of contained rage. "They called you an arsonist." Clara whispered, the words small in the vast, cold silence. "They called me your lover. He is paying them. Mercer, he is paying them to believe it." "They do not need payment to believe what they already fear," he said. He did not look at her. He looked at the land. His land. "My people. They fear us. They fear our songs. They fear that we know the water. And they do not." He sat, finally, his back to the wall, and the mask of the warrior cracked. The exhaustion, the grief, was a heavy weight on his shoulders. "My grandfather," he said, his voice so low she had to lean in, "survived the long walk. He was a boy. He watched them, the soldiers, herd his family like sheep. 400 miles to Bosque Redondo. He watched his mother, my great-grandmother, sit down by the side of the trail. She said she was too tired to walk. She told him to go on. He never saw her again. They shot her where she sat." Clara closed her eyes. The image was too stark, too terrible. "They kept him there for years, until the treaty. When he came back to this rock. My mother was born here. She taught me, before she died. She taught me the songs. She made me promise." He looked at his hands. "Keep the water, keep the song," he whispered. "Without the water, there is no life. Without the song, there is no hozo, no balance, no memory. Mercer, Blackwood. They are not just stealing water. They are stealing our memory. They are making us ghosts in our own land." The silence that followed was profound. Clara looked at the man beside her, a man she had first seen as a savage, a scout, an enemy. She saw him now, a son, a grandson, a protector of memories. She thought of her own father, of his maps, of the legacy of theft she might be a part of. She thought of her newspaper, back east, run by men who ate dinners with men like Blackwood. They wanted stories of progress, of savage lands tamed by iron and steam. They did not want this truth. This truth was messy. This truth was painful. This truth would cost her everything. She made a decision. She reached for her camera, the small wooden box that had been her shield, her weapon, her truth. She unstrapped it from her back. She set it on the rock, between them. Then she put her notebook away. "I will not write this," she said, her voice clear and strong in the cold night. "Not yet. I will not take a picture, not of this." He looked at her, his eyes suspicious, questioning. "I promise you, Ashki Yazi," she said, meeting his gaze, "I will not write one word. I will not make one plate, until I understand. From now on, I listen first." He stared at her for a long, heavy minute. The suspicion did not leave his eyes, not entirely. But something else entered, a crack in his own wall. He had risked his hozo by speaking. He had trusted her, an outsider, with his mother's song. He did not nod. He did not speak. He simply turned his gaze back to the valley, to the dying lights of the trading post, a shared burden of truth heavy in the air between them. The promise made on the cold ridge was a fragile thing, born of desperation and a shared, terrible moonlight. It was tested in the days that followed. Ashki Yazi did not lead her back to the world of telegraphs and railroads. He led her deeper into the land, away from the militia, away from the trails, into the heart of his home. The journey to Tibiyad was a lesson in humility. Clara had thought herself hardy, a seasoned field reporter. She was a novice. They moved through Coyote Pass, a narrow, wind-scarred slit in the rock that seemed to sing a high, mournful note. They walked on ledges so high and narrow she dared not look down, her heavy boots, so practical in the east, skidding on the smooth stone, Her camera box, which Ashki carried without complaint, became a symbol of her weakness, a heavy, square burden of her old life. He taught her, through action, not words. He taught her to walk on the rock, not the sand, to leave less sign. He taught her to read the microclimates of the canyons, finding cool air in the deepest shadows. And he taught her to respect the land, at a small, hidden spring, a dark seep of moisture at the base of a cliff. He stopped. Before he drank from his hands, he pressed a small, smooth turquoise stone into the mud at its edge. He murmured words she did not understand, a song of gratitude. Clara, her throat parched, waited. He looked at her, his dark eyes challenging. "The water," he said, "is not yours. It is a gift. You thank it." She felt a flush of defensiveness, the city dweller's practicality, but she was bound by her promise. She set her camera down. She found a small, plain pebble, awkwardly, her movements stiff and foreign. She knelt, pressed her pebble into the damp earth, and whispered, "Thank you." The water, when she drank, was as clean and cold as the water from his pottery canteen. It tasted of the earth, and now, of respect. She looked at her hands, the hands that held a pen and worked a lens, and thought of her father. He had seen water as a system to be engineered, to be mapped and diverted. Ashki saw it as a life to be honored. They slept under the stars. The first night, she had lain awake, the cold seeping into her bones, every snap of a twig a new terror. By the third night, she slept soundly, wrapped in a blanket he had provided, a thick, woven thing that smelled of juniper smoke. She was learning his rhythm. She was listening. Tubiad was not on any map. It was a secret valley, a green slash of life hidden within an impassive fortress of red rock. After a final, agonizing climb, they stood on the rim, and Clara gasped. Below them, protected from the wind and the sun, was a small, vibrant world. A stream, clear and bright, ran through the bottom. Patches of young corn, a vibrant, impossible green, grew in neat squares. 3 hogans, the traditional 8-sided dwellings of the Dean, sat near the stream, their doors facing the rising sun. Smoke, pale blue, rose from their centers. "This is the sacred water," Ashki said. It was not a boast. It was a statement of fact, a drawing of a line. As they descended, a child saw them, a small boy, perhaps 4 years old, with eyes as dark and bright as obsidian. He let out a whoop and ran, not away, but toward Ashki, launching himself at the man's legs. Ashki Yazi changed. The granite sentinel she knew melted. He laughed, a deep, warm sound, and swung the boy up onto his shoulders. "Tohi," he said, ruffling the boy's black hair. "You are getting slow, little lizard." A woman emerged from the nearest hogan, her skirts a cascade of color. She was near Clara's age, her face strong and intelligent. She smiled at Ashki, a smile of deep, familial love. "Nilchi," Ashki said, nodding to her, his cousin. Then, from the largest hogan, a figure emerged. She was old, her face a beautiful, profound map of wrinkles, her hair a cascade of pure silver, tied in the traditional dine way. She moved slowly, with a stick, but her spine was straight. Shimasani, his grandmother. Her eyes, bright and incredibly sharp, found Clara. The welcome died. The suspicion was a physical thing, a cold wind in the warm valley. Nilchi's smile faded, and even little Tohi went quiet, staring at the white woman who had come with their protector. Ashki spoke, his voice low, the words flowing. He was explaining. Clara caught her own name. Clara Walsh. She caught the word for the railroad and the word for enemy. Shimasani listened, her gaze never leaving Clara's face. When he was finished, she spoke. Her voice was thin, but it held an unbreakable authority. Nilchi translated. her English hesitant but clear. My grandmother asks why you are here. She says the last time a white woman came, it was to teach our children that our gods were devils. You, Nilchi looked at the camera. You carry a box that steals faces. I am not here to steal, Clara said, her voice shaking slightly. She met the old woman's gaze. I am here to listen. Shimasani said something else, sharp and quick. She says, Nilchi translated, that listening is work. She says to put your hands to work. Then, perhaps, your ears will open. And so, Clara's education began. For 3 days, she did not touch her camera. She did not open her notebook. She knelt beside Nilchi at the metati, the grinding stone. She learned to grind the dry corn, her soft, city hands blistering, then bleeding, then toughening. The work was brutal, a repetitive, full-body ache. But as she worked, she listened. She learned the sound of the corn breaking, the smell of the meal. She learned the songs Nilchi sang as she worked, songs of corn, songs of rain. In the evenings, she sat with Shimasani. The old woman was a potter, her hands gnarled with age, moved with a steady grace, coiling the clay, smoothing it with a piece of gourd. Clara, her own hands aching, was given a task sifting the clay. The patterns, Clara asked one evening, pointing to a finished pot. The black lines were geometric, beautiful. What do they mean? Shimasani spoke, and Nilchi translated. She says they are not just pictures. This one, she touched a zigzag line. Is the thunder this? A series of steps. Is the cloud this? A crosshatch. Is the water and the stars that guide it? They are maps. They are our memory. So we do not forget who we are and where the water lives. A map of memory. Clara felt a chill. Her own map, her father's map, was a map of theft. On the 4th day, Clara felt a shift. She woke, as she always did, to the smell of smoke and corn. But the suspicion was less Tohi, who had hidden from her, now brought her a bright, smooth stone he had found. Nilchi offered her the first cup of coffee, a gesture of inclusion. Clara knew it was time. She approached Dashki. I need to make a photograph, she said. His face hardened instantly. You promised. I promised to listen first, and I have. This is not for my newspaper. This is for them. She looked at Shimasani, who was watching, as always. One photograph of the family, as a gift, a trade. He was skeptical. What is the trade? My promise, made binding. Clara said, I will take the picture. I will develop the plate. I will give you the only print. I will not mark the location. I will blur the rocks. She pointed to the distinctive canyon rim. So no one can find this place from the image. The original plate and my notes I will keep in my private journal, in the code my father taught me. It will not be published. It will be my memory, my map, just like the pottery. He translated this to his grandmother. The old woman stared at Clara for a long, piercing moment. Then she nodded. Once. It was the most difficult photograph Clara had ever taken. She posed them in the soft light of the morning, outside their hogan. Shimasani, seated, a rock of authority. Nilchi, standing beside her, proud, her hand on her hip. Tohi, squirming, held in Ashki's arms, and Ashki himself, not the granite warrior, but the son, the brother, the uncle. He looked at the lens, his gaze still wary, but present. Clara worked, her hands sure again, her purpose clear. This was not theft, this was testimony. The peace was broken 2 days later. The sound of shod horses on the rock was a desecration. 2 men rode into the valley, their horses trampling the edge of the cornfield. Cole Mercer and the Indian agent, Pike. Mercer, in his dark duster, looked as clean and polished as he had in the saloon. Pike was a red-faced man, his belly straining his waistcoat, his eyes small and greedy. Ashki stepped in front of his hogun, a silent, unmoving warning. Nilchi pulled Tohi inside, and Shimasani emerged, her face a mask of contempt. "Well, well," Pike said, not dismounting, his voice loud and oily. "Look, Mercer, a family reunion. And who is this?" His eyes fell on Clara, and he smiled, a wet, unpleasant gesture. "The lost reporter and her lover. The newspapers will enjoy this story." "Get off this land," Ashki said, his voice a low rumble. "Now, Ashki, is that any way to talk?" Pike dismounted, pulling a sheath of papers from his saddlebag. "This is railroad land. Or will be. We are here to make you a final offer. Blackwood and Sons is generous, $200, for the entire valley, and your rights to the water." "This water is not for sale," Ashki said. "Everything is for sale," Mercer said, his voice quiet, deadly. He dismounted, walking toward Clara. "Especially the truth. Is not that right, Miss Walsh?" "You are trespassing," Clara said, her voice clear. "We are," Pike blustered. "Conducting official business. The railroad is coming. Ashki, it is progress. It is the law. You can take the money, or you can be removed by force. The militia in Stone Mesa is very eager to hunt down the arsonist who burned the Scully place." The threat was naked, brutal. Ashki held his ground. He held up his hand. In his palm was the small, crusted vial Clara had used to scrape the oil from the rock. "This is not dine oil," Ashki said. "This is railroad oil. This is your oil. You burned the ranch. Your man." He looked at Mercer. Left his mark. Mercer's eyes, for a fraction of a second, went cold with rage. But Pike just laughed, a wheezing, incredulous sound. "Oil handprints. What kind of savage courtroom is this? He slapped the sheaf of papers. "Is the truth. Black and white. Paper. Signatures. That is the only truth that matters in this territory." "Black and white. Paper." The word sparked in Clara's mind. "Get out," Ashki said again. "Think on it," Pike said, remounting. "We will be back in 2 days with the militia. Either we get a thumbprint or we get a fight." They wheeled their horses, Mercer casting one last, cold look at Clara, and rode out, leaving a scar of silence in the valley. The family was in shock. Nilchi was weeping. Shimasani was muttering a song of protection, her knuckles white on her staff. "They will not stop," Clara said, her mind racing. "But he gave me the answer." Ashki looked at her, his face dark with a grief she could not touch. "There is no answer, only blood." "No," he said it, "paper truth. That is what they respect. That is what will stop them." "We have no paper," Nilchi said. "Then we will make some," Clara said, her voice hard with a new, cold purpose. "We will set a trap, a press trap. We will give them exactly what they want." Ashki looked at her. "What are you saying?" "We stage a meeting, a fake signing. We will tell them. We will tell them Shimasani has agreed to sign, to sell the water." "Never," Nilchi cried. "It will be a lie." Clara insisted. "A performance. Pike wants a signature. Mercer wants my silence. We will give them a chance to have both in one place. And when they are there, when they are talking, when they are making their threats and boasting of their crimes." "They will just kill us," Ashki said. "No," Clara said, "because I will have a witness. May Murphy. She has a new machine, a wonder, a wax cylinder recorder for recording songs. But it records anything. We get them in a room with that machine, and we get them to talk. We make our own paper truth. We make a record. We catch their voices, their threats, their confession about the fire." Ashki stared at her, seeing her for the first time. Not as a victim, not as a student, but as a hunter. Suddenly, the sky, which had been a clear, high blue, darkened. A strange noise, like stones being rolled in a giant drum, filled the air. The temperature plummeted. "Inside," Ashki yelled, grabbing Tohi. "The hail!" A freak summer storm, born in the high peaks, was upon them. Not rain, but ice, white stones, some as large as a man's thumb, began to pound the valley. The noise was deafening. "The corn!" Nilchi screamed, running toward the field. The young shoots, so tender, would be shredded. "The pottery!" Shimasani cried, her precious, drying pots laid out in the sun. It was chaos. They were fighting nature itself. Clara did not hesitate. She was not a reporter. She was not an outsider. She grabbed a heavy blanket, a tarp, anything, and ran with them. She ran with Ashki to the cornfield, pulling the heavy canvas over the rows, the ice stinging her hands, bruising her shoulders. She ran with Nilchi to cover the pottery, the beautiful maps of memory. They were soaked, all of them. In an instant, the ground was white, the air filled with the roar of the ice. Clara and Ashki were both holding the same heavy, soaked tarp, fighting the wind that was trying to tear it from their grasp. "Pull!" he yelled over the din. She pulled, her hands raw, her fingers numb. Their hands, both gripping the same rough edge. Slipped. His hand closed over hers. It was not a caress. It was a functional, desperate grip. But the contact was a bolt of lightning in the cold. His skin, his warmth, his strength, covering her hand. The world narrowed, the roar of the hail fading. There was only the shock of his touch. Their eyes met. In his, she saw the storm. She saw the land. She saw the man, not the warrior. He saw her, not the reporter, not the white woman, but a fellow fighter, soaked and bruised, holding the line with him. The moment stretched, lasting an eternity. It was a truth more profound than paper, more real than any photograph. He pulled his hand away first, the contact broken. The roar of the hail rushed back in. Clara nodded, her breath catching in her throat. A silent agreement. This other thing, this spark, was real. But it would have to wait. They had a valley to save. They had a truce, an unspoken boundary. They would move forward, but only with safety, only with consent. And the time was not now. The plan was audacious, bordering on suicidal, and it depended entirely on Cole Mercer's arrogance. They returned to Stone Mesa not as a group, but as smoke, filtering in through the gaps. Ashki used the night, while Clara, cloaked and hooded, slipped back into the town's nervous rhythm. She found May Murphy at the livery, ostensibly loading a wagon with supplies. The older woman's trading post had been ransacked but not destroyed. The militia had been too drunk to be efficient. "He is waiting for your message," Clara whispered, her voice lost in the stamping of a nearby horse. "He has it," May said, not looking at her. "I sent word this morning. I told Pike that the old woman, Shimasani, was broken by the hail, that she saw it as a bad omen and wants to sell Pike." May spat on the ground. "Was so pleased he offered me a 10% finder's fee." The meeting was set for that afternoon, not in the saloon, but in the back room of the Stone Mesa Hotel, a place that aspired to a dignity it did not possess. It was, however, quiet and had a back door. The hours before the meeting were a torment of preparation. May Murphy, a woman of astonishing resources, already had her novelty machine in place. It was a phonograph, a recent acquisition from Santa Fe, designed to record and play back music on wax cylinders. "I told the hotel manager it was for the evening's entertainment," she grunted, sliding the bulky contraption under a sideboard, covering it with a dusty velvet cloth. The recording horn was angled perfectly toward the head of the table. In the adjacent pantry, a cramped, hot space that smelled of onions and old flour, Clara worked. May had, at great risk, procured new chemicals for her. She was preparing a single wet plate. She had one chance, one photograph. The hotel's pantry door had a small serving hatch, a crack she could use, a silent eye on the room. At 3 o'clock, they came. Clara, peeking through the hatch, watched them enter. Agent Pike came first, his belly leading, his face flushed with triumph. Cole Mercer followed, a shadow in his dark duster. He was all quiet confidence, the smell of his bay rum cologne sharp and offensive. Then Ashki Yazzie walked in. He did not look like a defeated man. He looked like a mountain, solid, impassive, his presence sucking the air from the room. He did not sit. "Well, well," Pike said, rubbing his hands, gesturing to the chair. "Sit down. Ashki, let us be civilized. Where is the old woman?" "I speak for my grandmother," Ashki said. His voice was flat. "Fine, fine," Pike said, pulling a stack of papers from his valise. "A thumbprint is a thumbprint. You sign these for your family, and the water rights for to be add passed to the Blackwood & Sons Corporation. Clean, simple, and in return—" He placed a small, heavy sack on the table. It landed with a dull, heavy clink. $200, a fortune, for you." Ashki stared at the money. He did not move. Mercer, who had been watching Clara's pantry door, finally spoke. His voice was smooth. "It is a good deal, Ashki, a generous one, especially since you have nothing left to bargain with." "We are here to sign," Ashki said. "Almost," Mercer said. He stepped toward the pantry door, and Clara's heart stopped, but he did not approach the hatch. He reached down to the floor, where he had placed a small, canvas-wrapped object. He unwrapped it and set it on the table. It was a kerosene can, the same oily, black-stained can from the Scully fire. "You see," Mercer said, his voice dropping to a confidential murmur, a voice meant to impress and intimidate. He was not just talking to Ashki. He was talking to the hidden microphone. "We must have our agreements finalized. We do not like loose ends. This," he tapped the can, "was a loose end. We had to burn that camp, Ashki, to make a point, to get the town on our side." Pike laughed nervously. "Cole, the papers. Let him just sign the papers." "In a moment," Mercer said. He looked at Ashki, a predator toying with its meal. "You see, we have to squeeze the price. Make it look like a fair, if hard, bargain. We burn one ranch. Blame you. We offer you money. You take it. The books are balanced." Clara had her hand on the lens cap. This was it. The confession. Clear as day. She saw Ashki's hand, resting on the table, tighten into a fist, his knuckles white. "Now," Pike said, shoving the papers and an inkwell toward Ashki. "Your mark." Mercer, smiling, picked up the kerosene can, holding it aloft like a trophy. "A souvenir, Ashki, of progress." Clara pulled the cap. The whoosh of the magnesium flash was a violent, silent explosion of white light. It froze the room. Pike screamed, falling backward in his chair. Mercer, blinded, dropped the can, which hit the floor with a hollow clang. "What in God's name?" Mercer yelled. From the hallway, a man a railroad security guard Pike had posted heard the commotion. He slammed the door open, his gun drawn. "What is it, boss?" The door, thrown wide, struck the pantry wall. The vibration traveled through the floor, through the tripod. Clara, in the darkness, was already sliding the plate into its protective holder, but she felt the tremor. She heard a faint, sick tick sound. The glass had cracked. "The bitch!" Mercer roared, understanding instantly. "She is in the pantry. Stop them!" Ashki did not wait. He grabbed the heavy oak table and heaved it over, sending papers, money, and ink flying. The guard fired his pistol. the shot deafening in the small room. Clara burst from the pantry. May Murphy, from the main dining room, yelled, "Fire, fire!" "The cylinder!" Clara screamed at May. May, with the presence of mind of a general, was already at the sideboard. She reached under the velvet, her hand grabbing the small, waxy tube. As Clara and Ashki bolted for the back door, May created her own diversion, throwing a tray of glasses against the wall. "Help!" she shrieked. "Murder!" As Clara passed, May shoved the wax cylinder into her satchel. "Go live!" They hit the alley running. Their horses were where they left them, tied to a rusted hitching post. But the town was alerted. The gunshot, the shouting, the militia, already drunk and eager, poured from the saloon. "There they are, the arsonist and the whore." They mounted, Ashki pulling his horse so hard it reared. They were not aiming for the open plains. There was only one route, the one that led out of the high-walled town. Crescent Wash. They galloped, the horses' hooves striking sparks on the stones, the shouts of the posse behind them. They were a dozen men, maybe more, and they were closing. They reached the edge of the wash just as the moon, nearly full, broke through the clouds. The sight before them made Clara cry out. It was not a dry bed. The rains from the hailstorm, miles away in the mountains, had finally arrived. A churning, muddy torrent, 10 feet deep and rising, filled the wash from bank to bank. "We cannot!" Clara gasped. "We must!" Ashki yelled. "They will not follow, hold on!" He spurred his horse, and the animal, with a scream of terror, plunged into the water. Clara followed a second later. The cold was a physical blow, a monster's fist that stole her breath. The current, immensely powerful, grabbed the horses, pulling them downstream. Clara's horse panicked. It struggled, turning, trying to fight the current, its eyes white. A wave of debris, a whole tree branch, struck its flank. The horse went under, throwing Clara from the saddle. She was submerged in icy blackness. The weight of her camera, strapped to her back, and the heavy soaked satchel pulled her down. Her feet found no bottom. She clawed at the water, her lungs burning, the roar of the river in her ears. A hand, brutal in its strength, seized the back of her coat. She was hauled, choking and spluttering, up from the water, dragged across the back of Ashki's horse. He had his arm clamped around her waist like a band of steel, holding her against his body as his own horse fought the torrent. "The map!" Clara screamed, feeling the wet, flapping emptiness at her belt. The oilskin packet, her father's map, the sacred valley. She saw it, a dark shape, tumbling in the muddy water, 5 feet away, then gone. "It is lost!" she cried, her voice breaking. "It is gone," Ashki said, his voice raw, strained. "Let it go. We must live." His horse found purchase, its hooves scrambling on the far bank. He drove it up the muddy incline, not stopping, not looking back, until they were a mile inland, hidden in a deep cleft of rocks, a small, dry cave. The posse had stopped at the river's edge. They were shouting, firing their guns into the water in frustration, but they would not cross. Clara slid from the horse, collapsing on the sandy floor of the cave. She was shaking so violently her teeth chattered. She had failed. They had lost the map. They had a cracked plate, and the cylinder... "The cylinder," she whispered, her hands fumbling with the satchel. She pulled it out. The small wax tube was slick with the muddy river water. "It is wet. Oh, God! Ashki! It is ruined! The water! The wax! It will be melted. Gone. It was for nothing." Ashki, his face a grim mask in the moonlight, took the cylinder from her shaking hands. He looked at it, his expression unreadable. He began to build a fire, his movements economical, precise. Soon, a small, clean-smelling juniper fire was crackling. He did not put the cylinder near the flame. He placed a flat rock a good distance away, where the gentle warmth, not the heat, would touch it. "Wax is from the bees," he said, his voice quiet. "It is strong, but it is soft. We dry it, slowly, we wait." The silence in the cave was heavy, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the distant, fading roar of the river. Clara was enveloped in a shroud of failure. "I lost it," she whispered, staring into the flames. My father's map, the part that mattered, the valley. Ashki was sharpening his knife, the rhythmic scrape of steel on whetstone the only steady thing in the world. "It is my fault," she continued, the words spilling out. "It is just like him. My father, he worked for a water company in California, a company just like Blackwood. He drew the maps that dried up a whole valley, that took the water from families. He drew the maps, and I am just like him. I carry maps that bring ruin. I am just a map maker for thieves." The scraping sound stopped. Ashki looked at her, his eyes dark, reflecting the small fire. "Your father drew a map," he said, his voice low. "You came here to find its meaning. You chose to come here. You chose to fight." He paused, testing the edge of the blade with his thumb. "No one is the map of their parents." His words hung in the air, a profound absolution. He finished his work, wiping the blade clean. It was a beautiful knife, the handle wrapped in worn leather, the blade long and dark. It was the dagger he had shown her once, briefly. He held it out to her, handle first. Clara looked at it, confused. "What?" "Hold this," he said. "I must check the ridge, see where they went. It was my father's. Keep it safe." She looked from his face to the knife. This was not a tool. This was a soul. This was the memory he had fought for, the legacy of the man who had survived the long walk. He was placing it, his past, his trust, in her hands. She took it. The weight of it was solid, real, an anchor in the swirling chaos of her fear. "I will," she said, her voice steady for the first time in hours. He nodded. Once. He slipped from the cave, a shadow disappearing into the rocks, leaving her alone with the fire, his father's knife, and the slowly drying cylinder of wax. She sat, her back against the cold stone, the knife in her lap. They had not touched. They had not spoken of the frantic, desperate grip he had on her in the water. But this exchange was more intimate than a kiss. He had brought her into the circle of his family. He had made her a guardian. She looked at the cylinder, still holding its secrets, and then at the knife. They had lost the map, the paper truth, but they had gained something else. They had the wax, and they had a covenant, forged in water and fire. The journey back to Stone Mesa was a silent one, fraught with the weight of the objects they carried. Clara clutched the precious, dried wax cylinder in its oilskin wrap, a fragile recording of a crime, tucked in her belt, heavy and cold against her skin, was Ashki's father's knife. In her satchel, wrapped in her last clean cloth, was the cracked glass plate, the image of Cole Mercer holding the kerosene can, a truth fractured but still visible. Ashki Yazi did not speak. He had retrieved his horse from the far side of the wash, and he rode with a grim, forward-leaning intensity, his eyes scanning the horizon. The loss of the map, Clara knew, was a wound he would not show. The loss of his sacred valley's location, set loose into the world, was a violation that dwarfed her own fears. They did not go to the hotel. They went directly to the one place left in town that represented a law, however fragile. Sheriff Hale's office. They found him at his desk, his head in his hands, a cup of cold coffee beside him. The town's fever had not broken. It had only grown, fueled by the failed chase and the rampant rumors of Clara and Ashki's attack on the hotel. He looked up as they entered, his eyes weary. "I should arrest you both," he said, his voice a low grate, "for inciting a riot, for your own protection." "We are not here for protection." "Sheriff," Clara said, her voice steady. She placed her evidence on his desk. one by one. The cracked plate, the small vial of greasy oil from the Scully Ranch, the scraping of the handprint. Hale looked at the items, his face impassive. Circumstantial, Miss Walsh. A picture of a man holding a can. Some oil. It is not enough. It is a start, Oshki said, his voice filling the small room. You are a man of the law. There is a law being broken. Or are you just a man who wears a badge? Before Hale could answer, Clara placed the wax cylinder on the desk. This, she said, is enough. What is it? A recording. Sheriff, May Murphy's phonograph. It has the voices of Cole Mercer and Agent Pike. It has their confession to the Scully fire. It has them boasting of land fraud and price fixing. It has the truth. Hale stared at the small tube of wax as if it were a coiled rattlesnake. This was it. The line. He was a man paid by the town, a town increasingly owned by the railroad. But he was also a man who had sworn an oath. May, he said, standing up. His decision made, if she will testify, if this thing works. She will, Clara said. Then we do this, Hale said. His jaw set. We do this now, before they can buy the judge. He grabbed his hat. I am calling an emergency town hearing in the main hall in 1 hour to present evidence regarding the threat to public safety. The town hall was the saloon. Its tables cleared, its floor swept. It was packed. The air was thick with the smell of stale whiskey, sweat, and a palpable, dangerous tension. Mercer's railroad security militia, their faces hard, their guns worn openly, lined the back wall. The townspeople, nervous and pale, filled the front. Cole Mercer and Agent Pike sat at a table, looking bored and confident. And at the front, on the judge's bench, sat a man they had not counted on. Justice Potter, the territorial circuit judge, a thin, stern man who had arrived on the morning stage and had been trapped in town by the flash flood. Sheriff Hale, Potter said, his voice like dry paper. You have called this highly irregular meeting. Proceed. Hale, his badge shining, stood. This is not a trial. It is a hearing of evidence. There have been crimes committed, a fire, fraud, and they have been laid at the feet of the Din. Miss Clara Walsh, a reporter, and Mr. Ashki Yazi have evidence to the contrary. The room erupted. Lies, shouted a militiaman. She is his whore. Justice Potter slammed his gavel. Order, or I will have this room cleared by federal marshals. And it will take me 6 months to get them here. Sit. The room quieted. A new man, a stranger in a fine Eastern suit, stood up. Your Honor, my name is Silas Croft. I am legal counsel for Blackwood and Sons. We welcome this opportunity to clear the air. Croft was smooth. He spent the next 20 minutes presenting his facts. He had surveys. He had geological reports proving the land was barren. He had deeds, legally signed, including the one from Mrs. Hennessy. He portrayed the railroad as a victim, a bringer of civilization constantly hampered by ignorant savages. The Dine, he said, his voice dripping with false sympathy, are an obstacle to progress. They do not understand ownership. They do not understand the future. They are, sadly, a people stuck in the past, and they must be guided, firmly but fairly, into the modern age. When he finished, Clara stood. Her hands were shaking. She presented the oil sample, the rubbing of the print. Circumstantial, Croft boomed. She presented the cracked glass plate. She held it up for the room to see. This, she said, her voice ringing, is Cole Mercer, Mr. Croft's associate, holding the very kerosene can used to guide the Scully family. This was taken moments before he confessed to the crime. The room stirred. Mercer did not move, but his eyes went cold. A cracked plate, Croft sneered. A trick of the light, a woman's fantasy. Then let us listen. A voice said, May Murphy, dressed in her Sunday best, was rolling her phonograph to the front of the room. "Let us listen to the fantasy." Mercer's face changed. He understood. Too late. What the machine was. He saw the cylinder in May's hand. He moved. It was not a panic. It was an act of deliberate sabotage. He grabbed a lantern from a nearby table. "This is a farce," he yelled, and tripped, stumbling toward the evidence table, swinging the lantern in a low, fast arc. He was not aiming for May. He was aiming for the cylinder, for the plate, for the entire table. He was going to burn the evidence. Ashki Yazi was faster. He had been watching Mercer, not the lawyer. He moved not like a man, but like a shadow, a hunting coyote. He did not tackle Mercer. He simply stepped into his path, his foot extended. Mercer, committed to his fall, went sprawling, the lantern flying from his hand. "Order!" Hale yelled, drawing his revolver. A militiaman at the back, one of Mercer's men, did not wait. He drew his own gun, leveling it at Ashki. "Get him!" Hale fired, his shot aimed at the ceiling as a warning. The militiaman fired at the same instant, his bullet aimed at Ashki's chest. Ashki was no longer there. He had rolled, coming up with the knife, his father's knife, in his hand. The militiaman's bullet, fired in haste, missed its target. It crossed the room and struck another posse member, a young ranch hand named Billy, in the shoulder. Billy screamed, a high, thin sound of pure shock, and collapsed, clutching his arm, the blood a bright, shocking red on his cotton shirt. The room went dead silent. The brawl, the game, the righteous anger, it all vanished. There was only the sound of Billy, weeping in pain, and the smell of gunpowder. One of their own, shot by one of their own. The community, so easily manipulated, stared at the blood on the floor and woke up. Into that terrible, ringing silence, May Murphy cranked the handle of the phonograph. She placed the needle on the wax. A crackle filled the room. And then, a voice, tinny, distorted, but unmistakable. Cole Mercer. Had to burn that camp, to make a point, to get the town on our side. And then, Pikes. Squeeze the price, make it look like a fair, if hard, bargain. And then Mercer again, his voice full of arrogance, his words clear. "We do not like loose ends. A souvenir, Ashki, of progress." It was a confession, played out for the entire town. Cole Mercer, frozen in place, his face a mask of unbelievable fury. Pike had gone white, his jowls shaking. Justice Potter slammed his gavel, the sound of final, cracking thunder. "That is enough!" He looked at Croft. "Counselor, your facts appear to be incomplete." He looked at Mercer and Pike. "And your actions are criminal." He turned to the town. "I am issuing a temporary judicial injunction, effective immediately. All Blackwood and Sons surveying activity within the lands known as 2B-Odd is hereby halted, pending a full investigation by the Territorial Court in Prescott. Sheriff Hale, you are authorized to use any means necessary to enforce it." It was a victory, a stunning, impossible victory. But Justice Potter was not finished. He looked at Clara and Ashki, his eyes severe. "This is a temporary stay. Blackwood and Sons will send more lawyers. They will appeal. They will bury you in paper. This," he said, "is only the beginning." Clara felt Ashki's hand on her arm. He was not looking at the judge. He was looking at the door. Agent Pike, in the chaos, was slipping out. Mercer was right behind him, his face no longer angry, but cold, calculating. "They are running," Hale said, moving to follow. "No," Ashki said, his voice a low, terrible sound. "They are not running. They are hunting." A woman's scream from the street confirmed it. Not a scream of fear, a scream of grief. Ashki was out the door before Clara could even move. He ran, pushing through the stunned crowd. Clara followed, her heart a cold stone. Nilchi, Ashki's cousin, was in the street, on her knees, her face streaked with tears and dust. She had just ridden in from the valley. "What is it?" Ashki said, grabbing her by the shoulders. "Nilchi, what is it?" "They came," she wept, her words broken. "While we were here, while we were safe, they came to the valley. The man, Pike, he came with another man. He said he had a gift for Shimasani." "Where is Tohi?" Ashki's voice was barely a whisper. He gave Tohi a piece of candy, a peppermint." Nilchis was choking on the words. "And when he left, when he rode away, Tohi, my son, he was gone." The world stopped. The victory in the saloon, the voices on the wax, the injunction, it all turned to ash. Pike had taken the boy. He had traded their legal victory for their life. He had taken Ashki's family to bargain for the one piece of evidence he knew they still had: the cylinder. Clara leaned against the wall, the world tilting. "My fault," she whispered, the words sour in her mouth. "I did this. I brought the cameras. I brought the phonograph. I brought the fight to them. This is my fault." Ashki stood, his back to her, looking at his weeping cousin. He did not comfort her. He did not speak. When he turned, his face was not the one she knew. The man who had touched her hand, the man who had trusted her with his father's knife, was gone. In his place was the warrior, the scout, the man from the ridge. His eyes were flat, dead. He walked past Clara, brushing her shoulder, as if she were a stranger. He went to his horse, checked the cinch, and pulled his rifle from its scabbard. "Ashki," she said, her voice desperate. "I am sorry. We have to—" He turned, and his gaze cut her to the bone. "Blame," he said, his voice a rasp of stone on stone, "is a luxury. There is no we. I am a hunter. You are a map-maker. Go draw your lines." He swung onto his horse, his movements economical, deadly. He did not look back. He rode out of town, following the trail of the men who had stolen his family. His words were a brand. "Go draw your lines." Ashki Yazi had left her in the dust of Stone Mesa, a map-maker without a map, a reporter without a story, a woman without an ally. The range of his grief was a wall she could not climb. Nilchi's weeping had been smothered by May Murphy, who wrapped the grieving woman in a blanket and her own formidable presence, taking her to the safety of the trading post. But Clara was left standing in the street, the cylinder in her satchel a cold, useless weight. Sheriff Hale walked up to her, his face gray. He had seen his town's decency shot in the shoulder. "Miss Walsh." "He is gone," she whispered, stating the obvious. "Pike," Hale said, his voice a low growl, "is a fool. But Mercer is not. They are not just running. They are going somewhere." Clara's mind, numb with self-blame, began to work, connecting the pieces. "The invoice," she said. "The special train from Santa Fe. The seed rice." "Depot Dry Gulch," Hale finished, his eyes hardening. "That train is not just arriving. It is scheduled to leave today. With the new survey data, they are not just kidnapping him. Miss Walsh, they are trafficking him, taking him out of the territory." The realization was a physical blow. They were not just bargaining for the cylinder. They were erasing a witness. "He will not know that," Clara said, her voice finding a new, hard edge. "Ashki will go to the valley first, to find them. He will lose time. We are closer." Hale looked at her, his respect grudging but real. "We are." He gestured to his horse. "It is a hard ride, and I suspect they will not be welcoming." They rode without speaking, a two-person posse against a corporation. Clara had his father's knife in her belt, a silent promise. She had her camera on her back, a habit of truth, and she had the cylinder, a voice in the wilderness. Depot Dry Gulch was not a town. It was a scar, a long, low freight depot, a wooden water tower. and a single set of tracks gleaming under the afternoon sun. A locomotive sat on the siding, a plume of steam rising from its stack. A living, breathing iron beast, getting ready to move. They saw him before he saw them. Ashki was already there. He was a part of the landscape, a knot of shadow on the ridge overlooking the depot. His horse was hidden. He was watching. He had not gone to the valley. He, too, had read the map of his enemy's logic. He saw them ride up. He materialized by their side as they dismounted, his face a mask of cold, focused rage. He did not look at Clara, but at Hale. 2 men in the office, he said, his voice flat. Pike and Mercer. 2 more on the platform, guarding that car. He pointed to a boxcar, its door reinforced with a heavy new padlock. Tohi is in there. The plan, Hale said, checking his revolver. I will go over the roof, Ashki said. I will get my son, you. We will draw them out, Clara said, interrupting. Ashki finally looked at her. His eyes were cold. No, you stay here. You are a hunter, she said, throwing his own words back at him. I am a mapmaker, but I am also the one they want. I am the loose end. They want the cylinder. Let them come and ask for it. Before he could argue, she was walking, her back straight, into the open, onto the dusty platform. Mr. Pike, she called out, her voice bright, clear, and utterly out of place. Mr. Mercer, I have come to discuss my exclusive. The 2 guards on the platform snapped their rifles up. Stay back, ma'am. The door to the depot office opened. Agent Pike emerged, his face a sickly, sweaty white. He saw her and his jaw dropped. Cole Mercer was right behind him, a dark cigar in his hand. He looked at Clara, and a slow, appreciative smile spread across his face. Miss Walsh, he said, his voice full of amused condescension. What a pleasure. You have come to trade, I assume, your little wax toy for the boy. Trade. Clara gave a light, airy laugh. She was performing, projecting the image of the frivolous, foolish woman they believed her to be. Mr. Mercer, I'm insulted. I am a reporter. I am here for the story. An exclusive. The Men Who Tamed the West. You cannot buy this kind of press. I want in. Pike looked confused. In what? Mercer held up a hand, silencing him. He was studying Clara, his cold eyes assessing. He saw her camera. He saw her ambition. He misread it completely. You want an exclusive, he said, tasting the idea. The real story, Clara said, stepping closer. From the men in charge, not the propaganda you feed the local papers. I want the truth, and in return, she tapped her satchel. I will be the official voice of Blackwood and Sons' progress in the territory. Mercer laughed. You are more intelligent than I thought, Miss Walsh, or more corrupt. I am practical, she said. He stepped closer, his voice dropping. I can give you a story, Miss Walsh, a long one. You give me that cylinder, and you can ride this train with me all the way to Santa Fe. You will be famous. The true voice of the New West. It was a perfect, vile trap. I am tempted, Clara said, playing for time. But what about the details, the boy, for instance? He is a messy detail. Mercer's smile vanished. Details, he said, can be managed. He is a temporary guest. He will be returned, unharmed, when the valley is secure. A high, thin sound cut the air, the cry of a canyon wren, clear, sharp, and repeated. Nilchi. It was Ashki's signal. Clara's performance was over. He is lying, she said, her voice hard. Before Mercer could react, the world exploded. Ashki was a blur, dropping from the roof onto the boxcar. He smashed the lock with the butt of his rifle and ripped the door open. In one motion, he was inside, and then out. The small, terrified form of Tohi clutched to his chest. He rolled, hit the platform, and came up running. "Stop him!" Mercer roared. Drawing his pistol, the two guards opened fire, their shots wild, splintering the wood of the platform. Pike, fumbling for his own gun, was a picture of panic. "Drop it! Mercer!" Sheriff Hale shouted, appearing from the side of the depot, his own revolver level. Mercer did not hesitate. He was a man of singular purpose. He spun not at Ashki but at Hale, and fired twice. The shots were deafening. Hale cried out, a sound of surprise, not pain, and spun around, a dark stain blossoming on his chest. He collapsed to his knees. It was a tableau of red dust and chaos. Ashki, with Tohi, was providing covering fire, pushing back toward the horses. Mercer and his men were pinned, but firing back. Hale was bleeding in the open. Clara ran. She ran to Hale, grabbing him under the arms, dragging him back. "Ashki, cover us!" she screamed. A bullet snapped past her ear. So close she felt its heat. She dragged the groaning sheriff backward, pulling him toward the only cover available, a low, dark storage shed, its door hanging open, filled with canvas tarps and smelling of pine. Ashki laid down a final round of fire, forcing Mercer back, then sprinted, diving into the shed with them, kicking the door shut. Darkness, absolute, save for the slivers of light through the boards. The shed was filled with the sharp, clean scent of pine resin. Outside, the world was yelling. Gunfire, and the chuff, chuff, chuff of the steam engine. Building pressure, a sound of impending escape. Clara had Hale propped against the wall. He was conscious, his breath ragged. "My chest!" he groaned. She was trembling. Her body, which had obeyed her every command, was finally betraying her. It was not a small shake. It was a violent, uncontrollable tremor, a storm in her own muscles. It was shock. It was adrenaline. It was the absolute, terrifying proximity of death. She was gasping, her teeth chattering. Hale, he..." Ashki was at the door, peering through a crack, his rifle ready. He heard her. He turned and saw her, not as a partner, not as a reporter, but as a woman falling apart. He moved to her. The warrior vanished. The man from the cave, the man from the storm, returned. "They are not coming in," he said, his voice low, rough. "They are protecting the train. We are safe. For a moment." He set his rifle against the wall. He put his hands on her shoulders, as if to physically stop the shaking. "Clara!" He said her name, and it was a new sound. He pulled her against him, a hard, grounding embrace. He was solid rock. She was the trembling water. He held her, simply held her, letting the storm of her fear break against the stillness of his body. "Only you," he whispered, his breath warm against her hair. It was not a declaration of love. It was an affirmation of life. It meant, "I am here." It meant, "We are alive." It meant, "You are the one who stood with me." He held her face, his hands rough from rock and leather, but impossibly gentle. His thumb stroked the mud from her cheek. He kissed her forehead, a brand of stillness. He kissed one eyelid, then the other, a soft, deliberate pressure, as if to seal away the terror she had seen. His hands moved, not with lust, but with a desperate, grounding need. They stroked down her arms, her back, trying to impart his own stillness into her, to quiet the tremors. But Clara, still shaking, clung to him. This was not a surrender. This was an anchoring. The fear of death had become a roaring, desperate need for life, for the opposite of the cold void that had snapped at her heels. She was not just in shock. She was painfully, acutely alive. "Touch me," she whispered, her voice a broken thing, her fingers digging into the worn fabric of his shirt. "Everywhere, more." It was a plea, a command, a gasp for connection, to be reminded that she was not a ghost, that she was solid flesh, that she was warm. He understood. He understood the hunger that was not of the body, but of the soul. His embrace tightened, his hands no longer just comforting, but claiming. They moved over her back, her waist, finding the strong, living curves of her body, a desperate inventory of the life they had just saved. He pulled her so close she could feel the hard, fast beat of his heart against her own. His mouth found the line of her throat, his lips a hot, living contrast to the cold fear. The world narrowed to the small, dark shed, the scent of pine resin, and the solid, living warmth of the man holding her. The gunfire faded. The shouting was a distant echo. There was only the sound of two people, breathing, and the frantic, healing touch of hands on a body that had chosen to live. A long, mournful whistle from the locomotive, loud and final, cut through the moment. The train was moving. It was leaving. The sound of the engine faded, replaced by the sound of Hale's labored breathing. The battle was over. The adrenaline was gone, leaving only the ache of bruises and the cold reality. They had saved the boy, but Mercer was gone. Clara, her breathing still ragged, pulled away, her hand finding a leather satchel on the floor. One dropped by Pike in the melee. It was unlatched. She opened it. Inside, a few papers, a bottle of whiskey, and a familiar, oilskin-wrapped packet. She pulled it out, her hands shaking for a new reason. It was the other half of her father's map, the half they had stolen from her room. Pike had been carrying it. "Ashki," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Look." He took it. He smoothed it out, placing her own torn piece beside it. The map was whole, and it was a nightmare. It showed her father's original lines, but it also showed Mercer's. They were not just after the valley. They were after the source, the deep, underground aquifer that fed the valley, miles away. "He knew," Ashki said, his voice dead. "Pike had this. Mercer saw it. He understands the whole map." Mercer, on that train, was not just escaping. He was moving to the next phase of the war. He was going to a telegraph station. Clara could see the message, clicking across the wires. "Have full map. Key is underground aquifer. Requesting full authority. Requesting explosives." They had won the battle, but Mercer had just escalated the war. The ride from Dry Gulch was a grim procession. They had retrieved Tohi, a small, silent form wrapped in a blanket, his eyes wide with a shock that had not yet found tears. Ashki Yazi held his son in front of him on the horse, one arm a steel band around the boy's chest, his face a mask carved from the red rock itself. Clara rode beside Sheriff Hale, who was slumped in his saddle, his breathing a wet, ragged sound. The bullet had gone clean through the fleshy part of his chest, missing the lung but taking a great deal of his strength. They had packed the wounds with the cleanest rags they had, but he was losing blood. They did not go to Stone Mesa. They went to May Murphy's. She took one look at Hale and barked an order, "In, on the table," while May, with a frontierswoman's grim practicality, boiled a knife and heated a branding iron to sear the wound. Clara and Ashki stood in the trading post, the recovered map spread between them. The full picture was devastating. Mercer was not just after the stream into Biad. He was after the source, a deep springhead high in the Coyote Pass, the place that fed the entire aquifer. "He telegraphed," Clara said, her voice hollow. "He has the authority. He has the explosives. He is not coming back to the valley. He is going there. To the head." "He will poison the source," Ashki said. His voice was dead, flat. He was looking at his father's map, now whole, and seeing a legacy of ruin. He will not just divert the water. He will own it, or he will destroy it. Hale's cry, as May pressed the hot iron to his wound, cut the air, a sharp counterpoint to their quiet despair. But the cry was followed by a groan, and then a string of curses. "Damn it, May! That is hot!" "It is supposed to be," she grunted. She bandaged him tightly, gave him a long pull of whiskey, and then looked at Clara and Ashki. Well, he has the wire. He has the men. What do you have? We have this, Clara said, touching the map. We know where he is going. We have the truth. The truth, May said. And a bullet in the sheriff will not stop a steam pump. You need men. You need guns. I have my family, Ashki said, his gaze turning to the door, where Tohi was now, finally, asleep. No, Clara said, her voice surprising them both with its strength. You have us. You. She looked at Ashki. Have your people. She looked at May. We'll find mine. The alliance was forged in the fire of May's forge and the shared taste of desperation. Ashki rode like the wind, not to the springhead, but to the valley, to warn his family, to move the elders. Clara and May Murphy did not rest. They rode to the ranches. They did not just carry news. They carried a story. They told of the hearing. They told of the wax cylinder, of Mercer's confession. And they told of Billy, the young ranch hand, shot in the shoulder not by a Dine warrior, but by a paid railroad man, one of their own. That, more than any map, was the bullet that broke the town's fever. The ranchers who had joined the posse in a drunken fury now saw they had been tools. When Mercer's men returned, 3 days later, they were not met by a divided, frightened territory. They were met by a new community. Mercer's column was a declaration of war. He had 24 armed guards, 3 heavy wagons, and, on the largest, the black, monstrous heart of his plan, a steam-powered pump, its boiler cold, its iron bulk a promise of industrial violence. The last wagon was small, heavily guarded, and marked with the stark, stenciled word, dynamite. They were not heading to Stone Mesa. They were heading for Coyote Pass, for the Springhead. And the alliance was there first. When Mercer's crew rounded the last turn, they stopped. The pass was not empty. Waiting for them, blocking the narrow path, were 20 people. It was a strange, patchwork army. Ashki Yazi and 5 other Dine warriors, their faces grim, their rifles ready. May Murphy, sitting on her wagon, her shotgun across her lap. A half-dozen local ranchers, the same men who had been in the posse, now standing shoulder to shoulder with the men they had been hunting. And, propped up against May's wagon, pale but resolute, was Sheriff Hale, his badge pinned to his bloody bandages. "This is a lawfully posted injunction. Mercer," he yelled, his voice thin but clear. "You are in violation of a territorial court order." Mercer, sitting on his fine horse, just laughed. He looked at the ranchers. "You boys are confused. This is progress. I'm here to make you all rich." "We have heard your progress on the phonograph, Mercer." One of the ranchers called back. "We are here to stand with the sheriff, and with them." He nodded to Ashki. Mercer's smile faded. "So be it. A rebellion." He turned to his men. "Set the pump. Set the charges. Clear them out. No killing, if you can help it. We do not need a massacre. Just disable them." The order, so similar to the one the Alliance had set for themselves, was a grim irony. The confrontation began. Mercer's men, a professional, well-armed force, began to advance, pushing the Alliance back. The steam pump was being assembled, a slow, greasy process. Men were uncoiling hoses, setting the legs. Others were carrying the small, deadly boxes of dynamite toward the springhead. And then the sky, which had been a low, bruised purple, opened. It was not the gentle rain of the Dine songs. It was not the brief, cleansing hail. It was a deluge, a solid wall of cold, driving water. The world, in an instant, was dissolved. The dry, baked earth turned to a slick, red-black mud. The pass, a natural funnel, became a river. The battlefield was not just chaotic. It was gone. Men were screaming, slipping, falling. Horses, blind with panic, tore free, their hooves finding no purchase. The roar of the rain was deafening. A new, neutral god that had entered the battle. Mercer's men, trained for a gunfight, were helpless against the land itself. Their wagons began to slide. The heavy steam pump, its boiler fire doused by the rain, shuddered, its new iron legs sinking into the mire. "The dynamite!" someone screamed. The crates near the springhead were being carried away by the new, churning red river. In the chaos, Clara saw her objective. Not the men, the machine, while the ranchers and the dine were engaged in a slippery, desperate brawl with Mercer's guards. Clara moved. She was a mapmaker. She saw the lines. She saw the main steam hose, the one that fed the pump. She scrambled, her camera still strapped to her back, through mud that sucked at her boots, pulling her down. She was covered in it, a creature of the earth. She reached the pump. It was a dead, iron beast, its drive wheel half submerged in mud, but the pressure was still in the boiler. She found the main valve, a large, brass wheel. She grabbed it. It was scalding hot, the residual steam burning her palms. She cried out, but she did not let go. She put her entire weight on it, turning, the smell of her own seared skin mixing with the rain. With a final, terrible hiss, the pressure was released. The machine was dead. Clara sagged against the iron, her hands a map of new pain. Then she unstrapped her camera. She wiped the lens with a muddy cloth, and she began to take pictures. She photographed the dying machine. She photographed the dine and the ranchers, fighting side by side in the mud. This was the proof. This was the true story. Ashki had only one target. Through the rain and the mud, he saw Mercer. The man was not fighting. He was on the cliff edge, above the springhead, trying to salvage the last of the explosives. Ashki climbed. The fight was not a duel. It was an animal struggle. Two men, covered in mud, on a slick, narrow ledge, the world roaring around them. Mercer, for all his fine clothes, was strong, a brawler. He met Ashki's charge, and they went down, rolling, slipping, their fists finding only mud and stone. Ashki was stronger. He had the land in him. He slammed Mercer's head against the rock, stunning him. He pulled his father's knife, the one Clara had returned to him. He pressed it to Mercer's throat. This was it, the end. The man who had burned the ranch, the man who had stolen his son, the man who would have poisoned his water. He looked down into Mercer's eyes, and he saw nothing but a mirrored, desperate fear. He saw a man, not a demon, and he heard his mother's song. Keep the water, keep the song, keep Hos-Ho. Hos-Ho, balance. Revenge was not balance. It was a new map of pain. Ashki let out a roar, a sound of agony and release, and he lowered the knife. He would not kill him. He would not become him. In that instant, Mercer moved. It was not an attack. It was a desperate animal scramble for freedom. He shoved, and the wet, slick rock did the rest. Mercer slipped. His feet went out from under him. He cried out, a high, thin sound of pure terror, as he slid off the edge. Ashki, in a pure, unthinking reflex, dropped the knife and lunged. He caught him. His hand clamped around Mercer's wrist. He had him, his enemy, dangling over a 50-foot drop, a torrent of red, churning mud and water roaring below. For a long, terrible second, they were locked. Ashki's muscles screamed, the mud sucking at his feet. He had chosen life, for both of them. "Pull me up," Mercer screamed, his eyes wide. Ashki tried. He braced himself, pulling, but Mercer, in his terror, was not helping. He was flailing, twisting, trying to get a purchase on Ashki's arm. "Stop moving," Ashki roared. But Mercer twisted again, a violent, panicked lurch. His wet, muddy glove, the fine leather one he had worn, ripped free of Ashki's grip. He did not scream again. He was just gone, a dark shape, swallowed instantly by the red, roaring water. Ashki stared, his hand empty. at the spot where the man had been. Living or dead, he was gone, taken by the water he had tried to steal. As the fight ended, so did the rain. The pass was a ruin of mud and steam. Mercer's crew, leaderless, their weapons lost, their machine broken, were surrendering. Clara saw May Murphy and Sheriff Hale, who had his gun on Agent Pike. The man had been found cowering under a wagon. "A good day's work, Sheriff," May said, pulling Pike's arms behind his back with a length of rope. She patted him down, her hands professional. "Well, what is this?" She pulled a sodden, folded piece of paper from his coat. It was a telegraph slip. "Your Honor," May said, handing it to Hale with a mock bow. "I believe this is the paper truth you are looking for." Hale unfolded it. It was the telegram from Blackwood himself, authorizing Mercer to use all means necessary, including force, to secure the Coyote Springhead. It was the final nail. Clara was out of plates. Her hands were raw, burned. She looked at the scene. The ranchers, helping the dine, May, tying up Pike, Hale, the law, victorious. And on the cliff above, Ashki, a solitary, rain-soaked figure, staring into the flood. This was the picture, the smallness of men, the silence of the broken machine, the vast, unconquerable power of the water. The world did not stay quiet. The aftermath of the battle in Coyote Pass was a slow, aching return to a world of consequences. The mud, the rain, and the blood gave way to the sharp, dry reality of paper. Clara Walsh, her hands bandaged and raw from the steam valve, became a creature of pure, focused work. She did not sleep. She rode with Sheriff Hale, who was carried in May's wagon, his curses a testament to his survival back to Stone Mesa. She set up her dark room in the hotel, the one she had fled, and this time she put a new, heavy bar on the door. For 2 days, she lived in the red glow and the chemical stink. Her world narrowed to the task of bringing the images to light. The cracked plate of Mercer holding the kerosene can was a difficult birth, a spiderweb of fracture across his back. But the image was there, undeniable. The photos from the past were stark, brutal, and, in their own way, beautiful. They were not art, they were evidence. She wrote. She did not just write a news report, she wrote a testimony. She wrote about the fire, the oil, the militia, the kidnapping of Tohi. She wrote about the arrogance on the wax cylinder and the corporate malice on the sodden telegraph slip. She named Cole Mercer, Agent Pike, and Blackwood and Sons. Then, she wrote the other story, the one that would not go to the court. It was a quieter piece, written for herself, and for him. She titled it, "No One is the Map of Their Parents." She wrote about water, about maps of theft and maps of memory, about an engineer's corrupted dream and a son's choice to honor the land his father had helped to wound. She folded it and put it in her valise. May Murphy, Ashki Yazzie, and a delegation of the ranchers who had fought with them traveled to Prescott with Sheriff Hale. They did not just send the evidence, they were the evidence. They carried the wax cylinder, the cracked plate, the telegraph, and Clara's photographs. Clara's newspaper, which had been so skeptical, received her package. Faced with the undeniable proof, the photographs, the wire copy of the confession, the supporting testimony of a sheriff, they did not just run the story. They made it a broadside. The war for water, Blackwood and Sons, arson and kidnapping in the territory. The story, once a whisper in a dusty town, was now a roar, echoing in the halls of power back east. Public opinion, once so hungry for progress, turned with a violent speed against the corporation that had employed a man who would steal a child. The territorial court, under pressure from Washington and the weight of the evidence, was swift. The injunction was made permanent. The Coyote Pass and the Valley of Tobiad were declared protected lands. Citing the 1868 treaty, Blackwood and Sons' charter for that route was revoked, and a full federal investigation was launched into their financial dealings. Agent Pike was indicted, his fate sealed by his own voice on a cylinder of wax. While the world of men and paper churned, the land began to heal. In the valley, the Dain held a ceremony. It was not a victory celebration. It was a cleansing. It was a Ho-Ho ceremony, a ritual to restore balance, to thank the water for its protection, for its fierce, cleansing flood, and to mourn the wound that had been made. Tohi, his small, silent form finally relaxing, was back in his mother's arms, his shock fading into the quiet, safe rhythms of home. Clara was there, in the valley. Ashki had invited her. She stood at the edge of the circle. She watched them sing, their voices a harmony with the wind and the stream. She watched Shimasani, her silver hair bright, sprinkle sacred cornmeal toward the spring. She had her camera with her, but it stayed on her back. She did not lift it. She remembered her promise. She was a witness, not a taker. This moment was not for her. It was not for her newspaper. It was for the water. She listened, and for the first time, she felt she truly understood the song. Later, in the quiet of the Hogan, she worked on the photograph she had taken, the one of the family. She developed the single plate and made one print. She blurred the edges, as promised, obscuring the rock formations that would identify the valley. She left it to dry on a rock, near the Hogan entrance. Propped up against Shimasani's water jug, the finished image, crisp and clear, showed the family, strong, unbowed. The image, born of chemicals and paper, sat next to the ancient, coiled clay pot, a map of memory, two forms of truth, two kinds of durable beauty. Ashki found his father's knife, the one he had dropped, in the mud of the pass, the point sticking straight up. He cleaned it. He sharpened it. He took it back to his Hogan. Clara watched as he stood, for a long time, holding it. It was the symbol of his rage, his duty, his past. He had almost used it to kill. He had used it to choose Ho-Ho. He did not hide it. He did not bury it. He walked to the small, hand-carved shelf where his mother kept her dried herbs and his father's ceremonial items. He placed the knife there, the blade bare, the handle warm in the firelight. It was not a weapon to be locked away. It was a memory, a guide, a reminder of the choice he had made, a map to show him the way. The healing of the community was slower. It was awkward, full of the shame of men who had been led by their worst fears. The ranchers who had fought with Ashki came to Stone Mesa and apologized, their words blunt and genuine. Mae Murphy, a pragmatist to her core, seized the moment. She organized a joint market day. "You all have wool," she told the Dain. "You all have beef," she told the ranchers. "Stop glaring and start trading." And on her bulletin board, which had once held the wanted poster for Ashki, she nailed a new hand-painted sign, Native Voices. It read, "Local news, local truth, spoken here." The new life settled around Clara and Ashki. The immediate threat was gone. The war won. What was left was the peace, which was, in its own way, more complicated. They sat, one evening, on the rim of the valley, the same place they had first looked down. The silence between them was no longer the empty space of suspicion, but the full, rich quiet of shared experience. "You will leave," he said. It was not a question. "I have to," Clara said, looking at her bandaged hands. "My story is here, but my work, my newspaper, they are back east. They are sending me to report on the investigation in Prescott." "You are a mapmaker," he said, the words no longer an insult. "Yes," she said, "I am. And you?" She looked at him, at the man who had reclaimed his balance. "Are a protector. The valley is safe, for now. And you will stay." "This is my home," he said simply. The silence returned. The gap between their worlds, once a canyon, was now just a space they could, perhaps, cross, but not by merging. "I will come back," she said. I know. This, what we started. In the shed, it was life, he said, his voice low. It was the answer to the gunfire. It was not a promise, Clara, it was a fact. She understood. He was not a man for flowery words. He was a man of facts. The fact of his land, the fact of his family, and, now, the fact of her. My truth, she said. And your land, they are not the same thing. I cannot stay here and watch the corn grow. That is not who I am. I would not ask you to, he said, turning to look at one. The hawk does not ask the sparrow to fly as high, but they share the same sky. We will share the sky. Then, she said, they would not dissolve into one another. They would not be a single, compromised unit. He would continue to protect his water. She would continue to write her truth, and they would support each other. Two strong, separate forces, allied by respect and the hard, undeniable fact of the life they had fought for. He reached out, his hand rough, his fingers brushing the back of hers. It was not the desperate, claiming grip of the shed. It was a question, an offering. She turned her hand, her burned palm meeting his, and they sat together, not one, but two, watching the sun set on their valley. Clara Walsh did not leave for Prescott immediately. The investigation would take weeks to convene, and the territory, for a brief, fragile moment, was at peace. She had a debt to pay, not just to Ashki and his family, but to the truth she had promised to serve. She used the money wired from her newspaper, a hefty sum, an advance against her exclusive reports to purchase a sturdy canvas wagon and new equipment. She did not just rebuild her old darkroom. She built a new one, a mobile one. She drove it out to Devouring, the heavy wagon wheels carving new, respectful tracks, but she did not stop there. She took it to the ranches. She brought it to the main street of Stone Mesa, parking it right in front of the saloon, now a much quieter establishment. She opened the doors, not as a reporter, but as a teacher. She gathered the children. Tohi, his eyes bright again, no longer shadowed by his capture, held the hand of Billy, the young rancher, whose arm was still in a sling. The children of the town, pale and freckled, stood awkwardly beside the dying children, a new, shy community. This, Clara said, holding up her smaller, sturdier camera, is a box, but it is not a box that steals. It is a box that listens. It listens to the light. It captures the truth you show it. She taught them. She taught them how to mix the chemicals, how to see the world in framed squares, how to wait for the exact right moment. She taught them to develop their own plates, to watch the ghosts of their own lives emerge in the developer bath. You, she told them, her voice passionate, her burned hands gesturing, will be the ones to tell your own stories. No one else can tell it for you. You must show the world who you are. Tohi, bold and curious, took a remarkable, if blurred, photograph of a lizard on a rock. Billy's sister took a stark, honest portrait of her brother, his face pale and brave, his bandaged shoulder a mark of a foolish, finished war. Clara was not just a mapmaker. She was giving them the map. Ashki watched her, his presence a quiet, steady thing. He did not interfere. He was a protector, and he saw that she was not taking. She was building. One afternoon, when the high desert sun was turning the rocks to gold, he came to her. He was holding a wide, smooth plank of cured cottonwood. He also held his father's knife. The stream, he said, needs a marker, a reminder, for those who come after. They worked on it together. He, with his deep, patient strength, carved the wood. She, with her precise, steady hand, drew the lines. They did not carve a map. They carved a statement. He taught her the word, hosho, carving the strange, beautiful shape of it. She carved the word truth beside it, the lines sharp and clear. They placed a line between them, not a wall, but a line of connection, hosho and truth. They carried the plank, heavy with their shared promise, down to the sacred spring, the one that had been the source of the conflict. They set it at the water's edge, a new kind of treaty, a new marker for a new territory. That night, the valley was filled with a peace so profound it was almost a sound. Shimasani and Nilchi had built a great fire, and they cooked a feast. It was a celebration of survival. The ranchers came, the ones who had fought. They brought a side of beef. Sheriff Hale, his arm in a sling but his color returned, brought a bag of coffee. May Murphy brought a small keg of whiskey, which she claimed was purely medicinal. They ate under the stars. The air was filled with the smell of roasting meat, the sharp scent of May's coffee, and the sweet, comforting smell of fry bread, which Nilchi and Clara had made together, their hands touching in the dough. The children, their faces smudged with soot and grease, ran between the groups, their laughter the new, true language of the valley. Tohi, who had been a silent, haunted child, was the loudest of them all, a small, vibrant king of the night. The Milky Way was a bright, shimmering road across the sky, a river of milk, a map of impossible, distant worlds. Clara sat on a blanket, a tin cup of coffee in her hands, her heart so full it ached. This was it. This was the messy, complicated, beautiful truth she had been seeking. It was not a single, hard fact. It was this, a community, broken and remade, sharing a meal, their faces lit by the same fire. A mail rider, dispatched from Prescott, found her there. He was a young, awestruck boy who handed her a heavy canvas satchel. Miss Walsh from the newspaper, back east. She opened it by the firelight, her hands, which were no longer burned but permanently scarred, fumbling with the clasp. It was a long, formal letter from her editor. Her dispatches, her photographs, her testimony had caused a sensation. The Blackwood and Sons investigation was the largest financial scandal of the year. She was a hero. The letter finished with an offer, not a promotion, but a creation. They were establishing a new southwestern desk, a permanent bureau to be based in Prescott or Santa Fe, and they were offering her the position, editor-in-chief. She read the words, and a cold, familiar feeling crept in. Editor, a desk, a world of paper, far from the land. Ashki, who had been watching her, came and sat beside her. He did not ask what the letter said. He just waited. "They want me to be an editor," she said, her voice flat. "They want me to sit at a desk. They want to give me a title and a salary and put me in a box." "You are not a person for a box," he said. "No, I am not." She left him and went to the fire, where the mail rider was eating a piece of fry bread. She borrowed his pen and his ink pot. She turned the letter over, and on the back, she wrote her reply. She accepted the position, but she added her terms. "I will accept," she wrote, "on 2 conditions. 1, I will not have an office. My office will be my wagon, and I will be in the field. 2, I retain full, independent authority over my choice of subjects. I will not just report on the railroads and the cattle barons. I will report on the native voices, the ranchers, the women, the children. I will be the editor, but I will be their voice, not just the company's." She folded it, sealed it, and gave it to the writer. "See that this gets to the Telegraph in Prescott." "Yes, ma'am," he said, his eyes wide. She returned to the blanket. The weight of the future settled. She had made her choice. "You are staying," Ashki said. "I am staying," she said, "on my own terms." The fire died down. The families left. The ranchers rode home, their goodbyes now easy, familiar. May and Sheriff Hale, sharing a final, medicinal cup, were asleep in the wagon. The peace was real. But as Clara helped Shimasani clean the last of the pots, the old woman spoke, her voice thin. Nilchi translated, her own face grim. "My grandmother says to be careful. Careful? Clara asked. A traveler from the south. He came through, trading. He said the flood did not kill the white man. The one who fell. The air went cold. Mercer? He said the man was found, miles downstream, his leg broken, his face a ruin, but alive, taken in by traders. He is gone, but he is not dead. The seed was planted, a hook for a future that was not yet secure. The war was over, but the enemy, broken and changed, was still in the world. Clara felt a chill, but she did not feel fear. She felt resolve. It was not over. It would never be over. Peace was not a thing you won. It was a thing you tended. She found Ashki. He was on the high rim of the valley, the place where they had sat before, looking down at the small, sleeping world they had saved. The moon was a perfect silver circle. She sat beside him, the silence comfortable, the shared knowledge of Mercer a new, unspoken bond between them. He looked at her, his face clear in the moonlight. He did not touch her. Only you, he whispered. The same words he had spoken in the shed, but now they meant something different. They did not mean I am here. They meant you are the one. Clara looked at the valley, her truth. She looked at the man beside her, his land, his hozo. They were not the same, but they were aligned. She smiled, a slow, sure smile. Only when, she said, her voice as clear as the night air, we are both ourselves. She was not the map of her father. He was not the prisoner of his past. They were two whole, scarred, and free. She leaned her head against his shoulder. His arm came around her, solid, warm, a fact. He did not kiss her. They did not need to. They just sat, watching the sky, a fire tended, a promise kept, a new map being drawn, together. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where in the world you are listening from. So please share your city or country in the comments below so we can all connect. If you enjoyed this tale, please consider subscribing to my channel, Wild West Tales, and give this video a like. And if you really loved it, please hit that hype button. It truly helps get these stories out to more listeners, just like you.